Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to do my kind of final review of the Tamron 35mm f1.8 DI VC USD. If you haven't already, I would recommend that you take a look at the build quality video, and because it will give you a close look at the overall construction and design philosophy of this brand new lens from Tamron. Just to recap some of the details from that, however, the full redesign of this new line from Tamron is beautifully executed, right down to the rear cap through to the front cap. Everything has been redesigned, even the overall font for the Tamron logo. Everything is new here. It's a step up in construction from anything I've seen from Tamron before. All metal construction, really high grade, professional grade construction. It also has weather sealing that takes the form both not only in the gasket on the rear element, but also with a flooring coating around the front, which that flooring coating it's an expensive process, and typically you only see that on lenses that cost considerably more than these Tamrons. And so certainly a big thumbs up for that. If I could offer up one final criticism to Tamron, Sigma is always kind to offer us a nice padded case with their lenses, and I really wish that Tamron would do the same. The Tamron does include the lens hood, which the Canon doesn't, by the way, and it has, you know, its rear caps and everything, but it doesn't come with any kind of protection case at all. Neither does the Canon, but the Sigma, of course, does. Also in a second segment, I took a look at the performance and tried to answer the question, are these super performing lenses? And I would recommend that you take a look at that, because really a lot of the questions regarding some of the design of the lens and some of the claims regarding its performance are answered in that video. But one thing that I didn't really highlight there that I want to emphasize more in this final review that sets this lens apart from the pack is that it has by far the most incredible minimum focus and then maximum magnification of any other 35mm lens. Now, the top of the pack previously was the Canon 35mm f2.IS. I love this lens. It's a great size. I've gotten a lot of use out of it, and I like it a lot. And I have found that its maximum magnification of 0.24 times to be very, very useful. The Tamron, though, takes it into a whole new level, and of course now ups the ante to a 0.40 times magnification. Of course, 0.50 is considered half-life size, and it is the magnification offered like by a lens, say like the Zeiss Macro Planar f2 50mm lens. And so this is a ton of magnification that's putting it right into close to macro territory, and it's extremely useful. Now, you have to get very close with that minimum focus. You can focus down to just a few inches in front of the actual lens barrel itself. But of course, it opens up a lot of possibilities, and I just love the versatility that that kind of minimum focus adds. So that's a big plus. Also, you'll note, although both of these lenses are image stabilized, you can see that there is a radical difference in the size of the focus ring by comparison. There's also a big difference in the action of the focus ring. The Canon, it has a much narrower focus ring, and it just doesn't move particularly well. And then when you get to either minimum focus or infinity focus, there's not much of there's just a little bit of a touch there, but it's very easy to kind of continue to focus beyond. By contrast, it almost seems like the Tamron lenses have been designed with manual focus in mind, because number one, you can see this has a beautifully wide focus ring that's very nice to touch, but then it glides along really nicely, has a longer focus throw, and a little more of a definite stop when you get to minimum or infinity focus. And so it's an easier lens to manually focus. That's a big deal, particularly when you're dealing with the fact that it can focus down so closely. Those of us that do macro photography almost exclusively do it by manual focus, because it's very hard to get because of how big the image is in the viewfinder frame, it's pretty hard to get one of the little AF focus points exactly where you want it. And so being able to manually focus is a big deal. It's just It's a well-designed philosophy when it comes to this manual focus ring because of the versatility. And then of course those of you that are doing video will really enjoy the manual focus ring on the lens. Just today I did a head-to-head comparison of the bokeh quality between these two lenses. And so as we examine this, let me just highlight by saying that the Tamron's bokeh is busier, in my opinion, than that of the Canon 35mm f2.IS. There's a little more activity within the concentric circles, and this is really just looking at, I used Christmas lights for this, and so it's really kind of a very unique type situation where you have a bright point of light that's going to be rendered as a circle. And so the Tamron's bokeh with that kind of scenario was a bit busier. The plus side is it retained roundness closer to the edges of the frame compared to the Canon. Also, I noted in that when I was doing a live view 10 times magnification using a remote shutter release to make sure for maximum pinpoint sharpness, that at least in the center of the frame where I was focused for this, the Tamron was a bit sharper than the Canon overall. But again, the trade-off is that the Canon has a better control of the chromatic aberrations. One area, however, that really differentiates these two lenses and when it comes to the Vignette and the Canon, one of the kind of prime negatives that's been noted about this lens is that at wide open aperture f2, it vignettes quite heavily. And in many situations, it's fairly easy to remove that vignetting in post-processing. Also, of course, there are situations where a vignette is desirable. However, most of us that even like to use a vignette would prefer to add it on ourselves when we want it and not in other times. But as you can see in this comparison of the vignette between the two lenses, the Tamron has almost complete lack of vignette at f1.8, while the Canon has several stops of vignette at f2 that will extend fairly far into the frame. So that is certainly a plus. Another big thing, and if I were making a decision between these two lenses, one of the key things that I would be looking at is the autofocus. So which one of these lenses autofocuses more quickly? Are they accurate? I did a side-by-side comparison, kind of just hitting a variety of different focus points and wanting to see going from a transition from a close focus to a distant to medium focusing. And so overall, in almost every situation, there's not really a discernible difference in focus speed. However, I found that in one kind of isolated instance where I felt like there was less contrast in the scene, it was a little bit more challenging, the Canon locked just a little bit quicker and more confidently. And so if you're shooting a lot in dark venues or places where you're going to be in more challenging lighting conditions, you still might be served better by the Canon, which I've used now for years, and it is a fantastically accurate focusing lens. It focuses very well. And so the fact, however, that the Tamron is hanging with it for the most part is certainly a big plus for this. Overall, I do want to say that I have had zero issue with focus accuracy with this Tamron, and that's been my biggest hesitation, despite the wonderful optics and the beautiful design in some of these Sigma Art series, is that I've had at times inconsistent focus accuracy. That's not been the case with this Tamron. It required a very little a micro adjustment on my part. I entered in a -2 value. But overall, my focus accuracy, even in portrait type situations, which is the most challenging in my opinion, has been exceptional and no issues there. And so it's very similar to this Canon in that regard. So as you can tell, just looking at the lenses side by side here, the Tamron is certainly a larger lens. It's not a large lens by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a larger lens, not as compact, which is frankly one of the best qualities about the Canon. In a day in which prime lenses have gotten increasingly larger, it was nice to have a lens that was moderately sized. So the Tamron is a bit bigger overall. However, it does add some pluses by comparison to the Canon. Number one, of course, it's a far more professional build grade here. The Canon is nice, nothing I'm complaining about, but it's engineered plastics while this is primarily metal. The Canon has no weather sealing. The Tamron is nicely weather sealed overall. I've also pointed out it's got although it's got some additional length, it's also got a much nicer focus ring added on to that. And so it is the same price for the most part, in at least using United States pricing, although right now there is a $50 off sale on the Canon, so you can get it for $549 compared to $599 for the Tamron. I will point out that there is a pretty big variability in the pricing on these new Tamron lenses according to their market. And so, for example, here in Canada, the Tamrons are considerably higher, and so actually here in Canada, boy, I'm having a hard time with that. The Tamron actually comes in a couple of $100 higher than what the Canon does, and so that's a bit of a challenge, and so that may be the case in your market as well. However, and I think that the target for Tamron was to try to always undercut the Sigma Art Series price. Unfortunately, I don't have one here for comparison, but of course the Sigma is 35mm f1.4 art is larger still by a good margin. Basically, you can kind of look at the values by which the Tamron is bigger than the Canon, and then by an order of magnitude, step that up to the Sigma size. And so the Tamron is smaller than the Sigma. It's less expensive, and again, using US pricing, it comes in at $300 less than the Sigma does. That may vary by your market. But of course, the downside to the Tamron by comparison is it has a smaller aperture, f1.8 compared to f1.4 for the Sigma. And the Sigma is lauded for its excellent optics. I've seen at least one comparison now doing a side-by-side with the Sigma and the Tamron and showing that they are basically equal at equivalent aperture, both at f1.8 in terms of overall sharpness. So the Tamron performs exceptionally well when it comes to that. And so optically, I don't know that you're going to have a downside there. I would say that I think probably the Tamron's bokeh quality is just slightly better, less clinical in my eye, but overall the optics are going to be very similar. And so your trade-off to consider is that with the Sigma, you're going to get a larger aperture. You may get less consistent autofocus depending upon your copy and your lens mount and body. But the Tamron is a little bit better built, better construction, and it does offer up weather sealing. And so if that's an issue for you, that's something certainly to consider. If you feel like you need the brighter aperture for your shooting, then of course the Tamron is never going to open up to f1.4. But overall, my verdict on this new Tamron 35mm lens is that it is an exceptional lens. It's got a lot going for it, beautifully built, great optics, and it just seems to do pretty much everything well. And then of course it adds on kind of the killer app of not only having the image stabilizer, which the Sigma and other Canons outside of the 35mm f2.2IS lack, but it also offers that incredible magnification. And of course, that magnification essentially doubles what the Sigma is able to accomplish. And so that's a pretty big plus if your shooting style includes some kind of pseudo macro or fine art shooting where you like to get close to your subject. And so at the end of the day, I have to say that Tamron has done a fabulous job with this 35mm lens. It would be a great tool in your arsenal if you feel like it suits your shooting style and your budget. And so I have no problem giving it an excellent recommendation. I'm very impressed with what they have done. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'll be adding the 45mm f1.8 video review here very shortly as well. Have a great day.